pregnant wife found her husband's mistress in his bed. Her revenge humiliated the unfaithful husband. The rain drummed against the windshield of Clarice Mitchell's silver Lexus SUV as she pulled into the circular driveway of their Greenwich colonial home. October in Connecticut had arrived with its usual dramatic flair: gray skies, persistent drizzle, and the kind of chill that made her grateful for the heated leather seats. At 31 and 7 months pregnant, every movement required deliberate effort. She placed one manicured hand on her rounded belly as she reached for her Hermes bag with the other. Baby Mitchell had been particularly active during the drive home from Greenwich Hospital, as if sensing her excitement about the ultrasound results. "Everything looks perfect, Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Weston had said, his warm smile reflecting decades of delivering good news to expectant mothers. "Your little boy is growing beautifully. Strong heartbeat, excellent measurements. A boy." David would be thrilled. After 3 years of trying, after the miscarriage 2 years ago that had nearly broken them both, they were finally going to have their son. Clarice fumbled with her keys at the front door, eager to share the news. David's black BMW X7 sat in the driveway, unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. He typically worked late at the dealership, schmoozing clients and closing deals that kept them living in their 3-story paradise with its marble foyers and designer everything. The front door swung open with its familiar creak that David kept promising to fix. The house felt different somehow, warmer than usual, filled with an energy that made her pause in the entryway. Soft music drifted from upstairs, something jazzy and intimate that definitely wasn't David's usual classic rock. "David," she called, setting her bag on the mahogany console table. "I'm home early. Wait until you hear." A woman's laugh cut through her words, light, musical, and completely unfamiliar. Clarice's hand instinctively moved to her belly as her heart began to race. The baby responded with a sharp kick, as if sensing her sudden tension. She stood frozen in the marble entryway, designer heels clicking against the cold floor as she shifted her weight. Another laugh, definitely female, definitely not coming from the television. The ultrasound photos crinkled in her grip as she started up the curved staircase, each step deliberate despite her growing belly. The hardwood steps that usually welcomed her home now felt like a path to something she wasn't prepared to face. "You're terrible," came a voice from behind their bedroom door. Young, breathy, amused. Clarice's breath caught. She recognized that voice from David's office Christmas parties, from the brief phone calls when she'd bring him lunch at the dealership. Ashley Rodriguez, 24 years old, long dark hair, bright smile, efficient with clients and devoted to her job. Devoted to more than just her job, apparently. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, Clarice could see rumpled white sheets, David's navy suit jacket draped over their reading chair, and a red dress she didn't recognize pooled on the floor beside her side of the bed. Her side of the bed. David promised he'd handle the Richardson account personally. Ashley's voice continued, closer now. "Said he'd do anything to keep me happy." Anything? David's voice husky and intimate in a way that made Clarice's stomach turn. "Well, almost anything. We should probably be more careful about timing. What if she comes home early? Clarice never comes home before 4. She's probably getting her nails done or shopping for more baby stuff. You know how pregnant women are. Completely predictable." The ultrasound photo slipped from Clarice's fingers, fluttering to the hardwood floor like fallen leaves. The sound made her freeze, but the voices from the bedroom continued, oblivious to her presence. She stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, watching the black and white images of her unborn son scattered at her feet. In one photo, his tiny hand was pressed against his face, as if shielding himself from a world he hadn't even entered yet. The smart thing would be to leave, walk away, process this somewhere safe, figure out her next move with clear thinking and legal advice. Instead, Clarice pushed open the bedroom door. The scene before her was exactly what she'd imagined and nothing she was prepared for. David, her husband of 8 years, sat shirtless against their headboard, the one they'd picked out together at that boutique in Soho. Ashley lay beside him, wearing nothing but one of Clarice's silk robes, the emerald green one David had given her for their anniversary. For a moment, nobody moved. David's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been panic. Ashley's mouth fell open, her perfectly applied lipstick smeared across lips that had clearly been busy. "Clarice," David's voice cracked like a teenager's. "This isn't, we were just..." But Clarice wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes had found the nightstand on David's side of the bed, where Ashley's jewelry lay scattered next to the framed photo of their wedding day. The same nightstand where Clarice kept her prenatal vitamins, her pregnancy books, her dreams of the family they were supposed to be building together. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if demanding attention in a moment that had suddenly shifted the entire trajectory of their lives. Clarice looked at David, then at Ashley, then back at David. No tears came, no screaming, just a strange, cold clarity that surprised her. She turned and walked away, leaving the door open behind her. The real question wasn't what she'd just discovered. The question was what she was going to do about it. Clarice's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, rain blurring her vision through tears she hadn't realized were falling. The Lexus idled in the parking lot of Whole Foods on Greenwich Avenue, a place that had always felt like home. Familiar faces, organic produce, the kind of routine that used to bring comfort. Now it felt like a stage set for a life that no longer existed. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat. David's name flashed on the screen. Call number 1, call number 2, call number 3. She watched it buzz until it stopped, then immediately start again. Text after text poured in. Clarice, please come home. We need to talk. It's not what you think. Think about the baby. Don't do anything rash. Ashley means nothing to me. I love you. The last message made her laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the leather interior. Love. As if love could exist in the same space as what she'd just witnessed. A tap on her window made her jump. Margaret Chen from the country club stood outside, concern etched across her face. They'd served on the hospital fundraising committee together, had shared countless conversations about pregnancy and motherhood over organic lattes. Clarice rolled down the window, quickly wiping her eyes. Honey, are you all right? You look... Margaret's voice trailed off as she took in Clarice's appearance. I'm fine, Clarice managed, her voice steadier than she expected. Just tired. Pregnancy, you know. Margaret's expression softened. Of course. Are you heading home? I saw David at lunch today with that lovely girl from his office. Seems like business is really picking up for him. The words hit like a physical blow. They'd been public, in broad daylight, at restaurants where people knew them both. Which restaurant? The question slipped out before Clarice could stop it. The Brass Lantern on Mason Street. They looked so professional going over papers and such that Ashley has such a bright future ahead of her. Professional papers. Clarice almost laughed again. I should get going, she said, rolling up the window before Margaret could respond. As she drove toward Manhattan, Clarice's mind began to organize itself with the same methodical approach she used for everything else. Lists, plans, logical next steps. First, find somewhere safe to think clearly. Jessica's Upper East Side apartment had always been Clarice's refuge during their college years. Her best friend since freshman year at Columbia had maintained the same no-nonsense approach to life that had gotten them both through organic chemistry and David's earlier red flags that Clarice had chosen to ignore. The doorman at Jessica's building recognized her immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, how's the little one? Growing strong, she replied, managing a smile that felt like wearing someone else's face. Jessica opened her apartment door before Clarice could knock, as if some best friend radar had alerted her to incoming disaster. I saw your location on Find My Friends, Jessica said, pulling Clarice into a careful hug that accommodated her belly. You never come to the city without calling first. What happened? The words tumbled out in a rush. The early appointment coming home to music and laughter, the emerald robe, Ashley's jewelry next to their wedding photo. Jessica listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. That son of a bitch, Jessica said when Clarice finished. And in your bed? While you're pregnant with his child? I keep thinking I should feel angrier, Clarice said, settling into Jessica's familiar couch. But I just feel empty, like everything I thought was real was just an elaborate performance. Jessica disappeared into the kitchen and returned with chamomile tea and a determined expression. Show me the messages. Clarice handed over her phone. Jessica scrolled through David's increasingly desperate texts, her jaw tightening with each one. Ashley means nothing to me, Jessica read aloud. Classic. And this one. Think about the baby. Using your pregnancy as emotional manipulation. What a prince. He's calling again, Clarice said as the phone buzzed. Don't answer. Not yet. You need time to think without his voice in your head, spinning stories and making promises he'll break next week. They sat in comfortable silence as rain continued to streak the windows. Manhattan hummed below them, 8 million people living their Tuesday evening lives, unaware that Clarice's entire world had shifted on its axis in the span of 20 minutes. "I keep thinking about the ultrasound," Clarice said finally. "I was so excited to tell him we're having a boy. I had this whole fantasy about how happy he'd be, how we'd start planning the nursery, picking names." "You still can plan those things," Jessica said gently. "Just without him. Can I? I don't even know who I am without being David's wife. We met when I was 23. Everything I've built, every friend I have, every social circle, it's all connected to him." Jessica leaned forward. "That's not true. You have your own career, your own mind, your own strength. You might have forgotten, but I haven't. You're the woman who graduated summa cum laude, who built a financial consulting practice from nothing, who organized charity events that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and who was apparently so naive she couldn't see her husband cheating with his secretary. Assistant," Jessica corrected. "And you trusted someone you loved. That doesn't make you naive. It makes you human." Clarice's phone buzzed with another text from David. "I'm coming to Jessica's. We need to talk face to face." "How does he know I'm here?" Clarice asked. Jessica checked her own phone. "Because I've been tagged in about 50 of your Instagram posts from this apartment over the years. He's not stupid, just morally bankrupt." The building's intercom crackled to life. "Mrs. Mitchell, there's a David Mitchell here to see you." Jessica and Clarice looked at each other. Through the window, they could see David's BMW parked illegally outside, hazard lights blinking in the rain. "You don't have to see him," Jessica said. "Not tonight. Not until you're ready." Clarice watched her husband pace on the sidewalk below, his expensive suit getting soaked as he repeatedly looked up at Jessica's windows. Even from 17 floors up, his desperation was visible. For 8 years, that desperation would have broken her heart, would have sent her running downstairs to forgive him, to work through their problems together to save their marriage. But something had changed in that bedroom, something fundamental and irreversible. She picked up the intercom. "Tell Mr. Mitchell that his wife isn't here," she said clearly, "and that if he continues to harass the residents of this building, we'll call the police." Through the window, she watched David stop pacing. He looked up at the building one more time, his shoulders sagging in defeat, before climbing back into his BMW. As his taillights disappeared into Manhattan traffic, Clarice felt something she hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in hours, she could breathe clearly. The baby seemed to sense it too, settling into a peaceful rhythm that felt like approval. "So," Jessica said, settling back into the couch with her own cup of tea, "what's the plan?" Clarice touched her belly, feeling her son's gentle movements, and smiled for the first time since leaving Greenwich. "I'm going to need a lawyer," she said, "and I'm going to need to understand exactly what David values most in this world." "His reputation," Jessica said without hesitation. "Exactly." Clarice's smile widened, and for the first time all day it felt genuine. "We're going to have to do something about that." 3 days later, Clarice sat across from Catherine Hayes, Esquire, in a mahogany-paneled office overlooking Central Park. The divorce attorney came highly recommended by Jessica's law firm connections. Sharp, experienced, and known for protecting her clients' interests with surgical precision. "The good news is Connecticut is an equitable distribution state," Catherine explained, sliding a folder across her desk. "The bad news is your husband seems to understand that too. Our investigator ran a preliminary asset check and David's been busy." Clarice opened the folder, her stomach dropping as she scanned the financial documents. Joint accounts that had been mysteriously depleted, credit cards maxed out on purchases she didn't recognize, and a home equity line of credit she'd never signed for. "This jewelry purchase," Catherine pointed to a highlighted entry. $15,000 at Tiffany & Co. 3 weeks ago. Ring any bells? Clarice thought of Ashley's delicate diamond tennis bracelet glinting in the afternoon light filtering through their bedroom windows. "It wasn't for me." "Of course not." "And this one? Cartier, 8,000. Same day you were at your doctor's appointment according to your calendar." The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. While she'd been listening to their son's heartbeat, David had been buying jewelry for his mistress with their joint credit card. "How long do you think this has been going on?" Clarice asked. Catherine consulted another document. "Based on the financial patterns, at least 6 months. Dinners at expensive restaurants when you were out of town, hotel charges in White Plains when you both live in Greenwich, spa treatments and shopping sprees that don't match your spending habits." 6 months. Clarice did the math. 6 months ago she'd been in her first trimester, dealing with morning sickness and exhaustion. David had been unusually attentive, encouraging her to rest, take long baths, let him handle the errands. "There's something else," Catherine said gently. "The penthouse apartment in Stamford. It's in David's name only, purchased 4 months ago as an investment property. But our investigator found Ashley Rodriguez listed as the primary resident on several delivery receipts. A love nest. While she'd been preparing their nursery, picking out paint colors and assembling cribs, David had been setting up house with Ashley 20 minutes away. "What are my options?" Clarice asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Legally, Connecticut allows divorce on grounds of adultery, which gives us significant leverage. We file for divorce, demand full financial disclosure, and petition for primary custody given the circumstances. With your husband's extracurricular activities documented, you're in a strong position. And financially, the house will likely need to be sold. Your husband has leveraged it heavily, probably to fund his double life, but you'll receive your equitable share of remaining assets plus child support and potentially alimony." Clarice nodded, processing. She'd expected the divorce, even the financial complications. But something else burned in her chest, something that wouldn't be satisfied by legal proceedings and asset division. "What about his reputation?" she asked. Catherine raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure what you mean." "David's entire identity is built around being respected in our community. The successful businessman, the devoted husband, the pillar of Greenwich society. What if that image cracked? Mrs. Mitchell, I need to advise you that any actions outside proper legal channels could—" "I'm not talking about anything illegal," Clarice interrupted. "I'm talking about the truth becoming public. Is there anything wrong with that?" Catherine studied her for a long moment. "As long as everything you share is factual and you're not violating any privacy laws or restraining orders. The First Amendment protects truthful speech." After leaving Catherine's office, Clarice found herself walking through Central Park, despite the chilly October air. The baby was active today, perhaps responding to her elevated stress levels. She paused on a bench near the reservoir, watching joggers circle the path in their purposeful routines. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Clarice, it's Ashley. We need to talk." For a moment, Clarice stared at the message, wondering how Ashley had gotten her number. Then she remembered. David's phone, their shared contacts, the digital intimacy of marriage that left so many traces. Another text. "I know you hate me, but you don't understand the whole situation." And another. "David told me you were separated. He said you were just staying together for the baby, but that you both knew it was over." Clarice almost laughed. Of course he had. The oldest story in the book. The neglected husband. The marriage that was already over. The wife who just didn't understand him anymore. She typed back, "When did he tell you that?" The response came quickly. "The first time back in April. He said you'd grown apart during the pregnancy, that you barely spoke anymore." April. When Clarice had been dealing with severe morning sickness. When David had been so understanding about her need to rest. When he'd encouraged her to take that weekend trip to her sister's house in Boston. The weekend he'd probably moved Ashley into their Stamford love nest. "And you believed him?" Clarice typed. "I wanted to. I know how that sounds, but I really cared about him. I thought we had a future." Despite herself, Clarice felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Ashley was young, naive, probably genuinely believing David's lies about his marriage being over. But that sympathy died quickly when she remembered the emerald robe, the jewelry on the nightstand, the laughter in her bedroom while she'd been caring for their unborn child. "Do you still think you have a future with him?" Clarice asked. A long pause. Then, "I don't know. Everything feels different now. He's been different since you found us. Angry, blaming me for not being more careful." Interesting. David was already shifting blame, distancing himself from the consequences of his choices. "Are you still living in the Stamford apartment?" Another pause. "How did you know about that?" "My lawyer is very thorough." "Are you?" "Yes. David said we should lay low until things settle down." "And then what? He leaves his pregnant wife and newborn son for you?" This time the pause stretched so long that Clarice wondered if Ashley had stopped responding. Finally, "He said once the baby was born and you were settled with custody arrangements, we could be public about our relationship." Public, as if they were star-crossed lovers instead of a cheating husband and his mistress. But the conversation had given Clarice something valuable. Insight into David's plan. He wasn't panicking or trying to save his marriage. He was managing the situation, controlling the narrative, positioning himself to minimize damage while maintaining his relationship with Ashley. He thought he could have it all: the respect of the community, a clean divorce that painted him as the reasonable party, and his young girlfriend waiting in the wings. Clarice smiled, watching the sun set over Manhattan's skyline. She thought about the Greenwich Charity Gala, still 6 weeks away, the biggest social event of the year, where David would undoubtedly appear with Ashley, ready to debut their relationship to society once his divorce was underway. She opened her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found what she was looking for: Brennan Webb, the local videographer who documented dozens of community events over the years. He was discreet, professional, and owed her a favor from when she'd recommended his services to 3 different charity committees. "Brennan, it's Clarice Mitchell. I have a project I'd like to discuss. Are you available to meet tomorrow?" His response came within minutes. "Of course. What kind of project?" Clarice looked at her reflection in the phone screen, tired, but with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. "A truth-telling project. I'll explain everything when we meet." As she walked back toward Jessica's apartment, the baby kicked again, strong and purposeful. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling her son's movements as if he were encouraging her forward. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered. "Mommy's going to make sure you grow up in a world where actions have consequences." The wheels were finally in motion. Brennan Webb's studio occupied the 2nd floor of a converted warehouse in Norwalk, 20 minutes from Greenwich, but worlds away from its manicured lawns and country club sensibilities. Clarice climbed the narrow stairs carefully, one hand on the railing and the other supporting her growing belly. The space buzzed with creative energy. Camera equipment lined the walls, editing stations hummed with ongoing projects, and the scent of coffee mixed with the faint chemical smell of developing film. It reminded her of her college days, before her life became measured in charity luncheons and society pages. "Clarice!" Brennan emerged from behind a bank of monitors, his familiar smile warm but curious. In his early 40s, with graying temples and paint-stained fingers, he'd been documenting Greenwich's social scene for over a decade. "You look radiant. Pregnancy suits you." She managed a genuine smile. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice." "Of course. Though I have to admit, your message intrigued me." "A truth-telling project?" He gestured toward a comfortable seating area near the windows. "Coffee? Or tea for the mom-to-be?" Tea would be perfect. As Brennan prepared their drinks, Clarice studied the wall of framed photographs: charity galas, ribbon cuttings, political fundraisers, the visual history of Greenwich's elite, all smiling faces and designer gowns. She found several photos featuring herself and David at various events, looking like the perfect couple, looking like a lie. "So," Brennan said, settling into the chair across from her with 2 steaming mugs, "what kind of truth are we telling?" Clarice had rehearsed this conversation, but sitting here under Brennan's direct gaze, she felt the weight of what she was about to set in motion. "My marriage is over," she said simply. "David has been having an affair with his assistant for months. I found them together in our bedroom 3 days ago." Brennan's expression shifted from curious to concerned. "Clarice, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine. I need to tell my story publicly, before he gets the chance to control the narrative." "Publicly how?" "The Greenwich Charity Gala is in 6 weeks. David will be there with her, probably ready to introduce Ashley as his new girlfriend once our separation becomes official. I want to create a video that tells the truth about what happened." Brennan set down his mug, his filmmaker's instincts clearly engaged. "What kind of video?" "Simple. Just me, talking directly to the camera. No drama, no hysteria. Just the facts, delivered calmly and clearly to everyone who matters in our community." "And you want to show this at the gala?" "I want to show it at the gala, without warning, without David knowing it's coming." Brennan was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "Clarice, that would be nuclear, for David's reputation, his business relationships, everything." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "It would be. Are you sure that's what you want? Once something like this goes public, there's no taking it back." Clarice thought about Ashley's texts from the night before, the young woman who genuinely believed David's lies about their marriage being over. She thought about the Stamford apartment, the jewelry purchases, the careful deception that had been orchestrated while she carried his child. "He's been planning this for months, Brennan. The separate apartment, the financial maneuvering, the story he told Ashley about us being separated. He thought he could manage the situation, control how it played out publicly. He never considered that I might have my own voice in this." Brennan leaned forward, his expression serious. "What exactly would you say in this video?" "The truth. That I discovered my husband in bed with his assistant while I was 7 months pregnant. That they'd been having an affair for months while he lied to our friends, our community, and me about the state of our marriage. That he bought her an apartment and jewelry with our joint finances while I was preparing our nursery. No accusations of illegal activity. No private information that could get us in legal trouble. Nothing illegal. Nothing private. Just facts that David chose to make real when he decided to betray his family. Brennan nodded slowly. The technical aspects wouldn't be difficult. A simple setup, professional lighting, clean audio. The real question is distribution. How do you plan to show this at the gala? I was hoping you might have ideas about that. He stood and walked to his desk, returning with a tablet. I've filmed the Greenwich Charity Gala for the past 5 years. The setup is always the same. Main projection screen for the auction presentations, smaller monitors throughout the venue for promotional videos and sponsor recognition. He pulled up photos from previous year's events. The AV system runs from a central control booth, usually staffed by the hotel's tech team, but they're not particularly vigilant. If someone with the right credentials wanted to interrupt the programming, someone like the videographer who's been documenting the event for 5 years, hypothetically speaking, his eyes met hers. But Clarice, I need you to understand what you're asking. This isn't just about embarrassing David. You'd be destroying relationships, ending friendships, changing how your entire community sees your family. My family. The words came out sharper than she intended. My family is me and my unborn son. David chose to end our family when he decided Ashley was more important than the vows he made to me. Brennan studied her face, perhaps seeing something there that convinced him of her resolve. When would you want to film this? As soon as possible. Before I start showing too much more, before David figures out what I'm planning. And after? Have you thought about what happens to you after this goes public? Clarice placed her hand on her belly, feeling her son's gentle movements. I'll be a single mother raising a child whose father chose his own desires over his family's well-being. But at least I'll be raising him in a world where my son knows his mother didn't stay silent when faced with betrayal. They spent the next hour discussing logistics. The video would be simple but professional. Clarice seated in an elegant chair against a neutral background, speaking directly to the camera. No theatrical elements, no emotional manipulation. Just clear, factual statements delivered with the dignity David had tried to strip from her. One more thing, Brennan said as they prepared to leave. Are you prepared for the possibility that this might backfire? That some people might see you as vindictive instead of wronged? Clarice considered the question. Do you think David considered whether I might see him as vindictive when he brought his mistress into our bedroom? When he used our joint credit cards to buy her jewelry? When he told her our marriage was over while I was carrying his child? Fair point. I'm not doing this to be cruel, Brennan. I'm doing it because David has counted on my silence, my politeness, my desire to keep our private business private. He's counted on me being the perfect Greenwich wife who suffers quietly and maintains appearances. She stood carefully, her pregnancy making the movement deliberate. But I'm not just his wife anymore. I'm about to be someone's mother. And I want my son to know that when someone tries to erase you from your own story, you have the right to pick up the pen and keep writing. Brennan walked her to the stairs, his expression thoughtful. We'll film next week. Wednesday afternoon work for you? Perfect. As Clarice drove back toward Manhattan, her phone buzzed with a text from David. Clarice, please. We need to talk about our future. About the baby's future. Don't let pride destroy our family. She almost responded immediately, but stopped herself. David was still trying to control the narrative, still positioning himself as the reasonable party who wanted to work things out. Instead, she forwarded the message to Catherine Hayes with a note. More evidence of his attempts at manipulation. Save this with the others. Her lawyer's response came quickly. Noted. How are you holding up? Clarice thought about the afternoon with Brennan, the plans taking shape, the moment 6 weeks from now when David's carefully constructed public image would crumble in real time. Better than expected. I think I'm finally learning how to fight back. The baby kicked approvingly, and for the first time since discovering the affair, Clarice felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Wednesday afternoon brought an unseasonably warm October day to Connecticut. Clarice sat in Brennan's studio, hands folded carefully over her 8-month belly, watching him adjust camera angles and lighting with professional precision. How are you feeling? He asked, stepping back to evaluate the setup. Nervous? Surprisingly calm, she replied, and meant it. The past week had brought a strange clarity, as if finally taking action had lifted a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. The setting was perfect, Elegant but not ostentatious. A simple cream-colored chair against a soft gray backdrop. Nothing to distract from her words. Nothing that could be criticized as theatrical or vindictive. "Remember," Brennan said, settling behind the camera, "you can stop any time. We can do as many takes as you need. This is your story told your way." Clarice nodded and looked directly into the lens. She'd practiced this speech dozens of times in Jessica's apartment, refining each word until it felt both truthful and unassailable. "Whenever you're ready," Brennan said softly. She took a deep breath and began. "Good evening. My name is Clarice Mitchell. Many of you know me as David Mitchell's wife, but tonight I'm speaking for myself and for my unborn son." Her voice was steady, clear, without a trace of the hysteria David would probably expect. She'd spent years speaking at charity events, organizing committees, addressing rooms full of Greenwich's elite. This was just another speech, except this time, every word mattered. 6 weeks ago, I returned home early from a prenatal appointment, 8 months pregnant with our first child, and found my husband in our bedroom with his assistant, Ashley Rodriguez. They were in our bed, wearing clothes I recognized, surrounded by jewelry I'd never seen before. She paused, letting the image settle. The facts were stark enough without embellishment. In the days that followed, I discovered this wasn't a moment of poor judgment. David and Ashley had been conducting an affair for at least 6 months. He'd purchased an apartment in Stamford where she lived, bought her expensive jewelry with our joint credit cards, and told her that our marriage was essentially over, that we were only staying together for the sake of the pregnancy. Clarice's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her son seemed to respond to the sound of her voice. "I share this, not for sympathy but for truth. David has built his reputation in our community on being a family man, a devoted husband, someone you can trust with your business and your friendship. I want you to know who he really is when those cameras aren't rolling and those handshakes aren't being counted." She'd debated this next part, knowing it would be the most damaging, but David had made these choices public when he decided to parade Ashley around Greenwich. If you've seen David at restaurants or events in recent weeks with a young woman who isn't his pregnant wife, now you know why. If you've wondered why I haven't been at his side lately, now you understand. If you've heard rumors about our marriage, I want you to hear the truth directly from me. The words felt powerful leaving her lips, each one a small act of reclamation. I'm not here to destroy David's career or to seek revenge for revenge's sake. I'm here because my son deserves to grow up in a world where actions have consequences, where lies don't go unchallenged, and where the people who claim to love you don't get to rewrite history to make themselves comfortable. She paused, gathering herself for the final section. To those of you who have supported our family over the years, who have been genuine friends to both of us, I want you to know that discovering this betrayal was devastating. But it also showed me something important. I am stronger than I knew, and I will not allow anyone, even my husband, to make me disappear from my own story. Her voice grew firmer, more resolute. David chose Ashley Rodriguez over his pregnant wife and unborn child. He chose deception over honesty, his pleasure over his family's well-being. Those were his choices. This, speaking the truth to our community, is mine. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes clear and unwavering. I wish all of you well. I hope you'll remember this moment the next time someone asks you to trust David Mitchell with something important to you. And I hope my son grows up understanding that dignity isn't something other people can take from you. It's something you choose to keep. She sat quietly for a moment, then looked at Brennan. Was that okay? That was perfect, he said, his voice slightly awed. Clarice, that was incredibly powerful. No one could watch that and question your credibility or your motives. Relief flooded through her. How long was it? Just under 4 minutes. Long enough to tell the complete story, short enough to hold everyone's attention. As Brennan reviewed the footage, Clarice's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. How did it go? Are you okay? Better than okay. I think I just found my voice again. Another message appeared, this one from Ashley. Clarice, David told me you're planning something vindictive for the charity gala. Please don't do anything you'll regret. Think about your baby. Clarice stared at the message, anger flaring. David was using Ashley to try to manipulate her, feeding the younger woman just enough information to make her feel complicit while keeping his own hands clean. She typed back, Ashley, are you still living in the Stamford apartment David bought you? Yes, but are you still wearing the jewelry he purchased with our joint credit cards? Clarice, you don't understand. Are you planning to attend the charity gala as David's date? A long pause, then. He said once your divorce is final, We don't have to hide anymore. Then you should understand that I'm not planning anything vindictive. I'm simply planning to tell the truth. If that threatens you, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Clarice put her phone away without waiting for a response. Ashley could choose to attend the gala or not, but she couldn't claim ignorance about what she'd walked into anymore. The video looks excellent, Brennan said, turning his monitor so she could see. Clean, professional, powerful. Are you sure you want to go through with showing this publicly? On screen, Clarice looked composed, dignified, and absolutely credible. This wasn't the performance of a vindictive ex-wife seeking revenge. It was the testimony of a woman who'd been betrayed and refused to be silenced. I've never been more sure of anything, she said. Then we'll be ready for the gala. I'll prepare the technical setup this weekend and do a dry run early next week. By the time David sees this video, it'll be too late for him to stop it. As Clarice prepared to leave, Brennan hesitated, then spoke again. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you prepared for the fact that after this goes public, your life in Greenwich might be over? That some people will choose David's side regardless of what he's done? Clarice considered the question as she gathered her purse. Brennan, my life in Greenwich was already over. It ended the moment I opened that bedroom door. The only question was whether I was going to let David control how it ended, or whether I was going to have a say in my own story. She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Besides, Greenwich was David's dream, not mine. I think it's time I figured out what my dreams look like. As she drove back to Jessica's apartment, Clarice thought about the video, about the charity gala 5 weeks away, about the moment when David's carefully constructed world would shift on its axis. For the first time since discovering the affair, she felt like herself again. Not David's wife, not a victim of his choices, but Clarice, a woman who'd been knocked down but refused to stay there. Her son kicked vigorously, as if applauding her decision. Don't worry, little one, she whispered. Mommy's going to teach you that the truth isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to be proud of. 3 weeks before the Greenwich Charity Gala, Clarice sat in Dr. Elizabeth Walsh's office for her 36-week checkup. The obstetrician smiled as she reviewed the ultrasound images, pointing out their son's healthy development. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Walsh said. Baby's in the right position, excellent size, strong heartbeat. Are you feeling ready for motherhood? More ready than I thought possible, Clarice replied, and she meant it. The past month had brought an unexpected peace, as if finally taking control of her narrative had freed her to focus on what truly mattered. And how are things at home? I know pregnancy can put stress on relationships. Clarice had been dreading this question, knowing she'd have to reveal the truth eventually. Actually, David and I are separated. I'm staying with a friend in Manhattan until after the baby's born. Dr. Walsh's expression grew concerned. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you getting enough support? Emotional and practical? More than enough. My friend Jessica has been wonderful, and I have a good lawyer helping with the logistics. What about after the baby arrives? Do you have plans for where you'll live? It was a question Clarice had been avoiding, but one she needed to face. I'm looking at options. David and I will need to sell the house as part of the divorce settlement anyway. I'm thinking about staying in the area, maybe Westport or Darien, somewhere with good schools but far enough from Greenwich to start fresh. As she left the doctor's office, Clarice's phone buzzed with a call from Catherine Hayes. Good news and potentially complicated news, her lawyer said without preamble. The good news is David's financial disclosure came back, and our forensic accountant found several irregularities that work in your favor. The complicated news is that David's attorney is requesting a mediation meeting next week. What kind of irregularities? Hidden accounts, underreported income, and some creative bookkeeping related to the dealership's finances. Nothing criminal, but enough to suggest he's been preparing for this divorce longer than he's admitted. Clarice felt a familiar surge of anger. Even David's surprise at being caught had been performative. He'd been planning his exit strategy while she'd been planning their nursery. What does he want to mediate? Custody arrangements primarily. He's requesting joint custody and wants to establish a visitation schedule before the baby's born. His lawyer is positioning him as the concerned father who wants to be involved. And what do you think? I think David's worried about how the divorce proceedings might affect his reputation if they become contentious. Mediation keeps everything private, lets him control the narrative. Clarice almost laughed. He's still thinking about narrative control. Always. But here's the thing. We don't have to accept mediation. We can let this play out in court where everything becomes public record. Actually, Clarice said, an idea forming, I think we should accept the mediation. Really? Why? Because I want to look David in the eye when I tell him exactly what I think of his concerned father act. And I want him to feel confident that he's managed the situation before the gala. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Clarice, what exactly are you planning for this charity event? Nothing illegal, nothing defamatory. Just the truth delivered to the people who matter most in David's professional and social life. I can't officially encourage that kind of public revelation. I understand. But you can't officially discourage me from exercising my First Amendment rights either. No, I cannot. Just be careful and make sure whatever you're planning can't be used against you in custody proceedings. After hanging up with Catherine, Clarice drove to Brennan's studio for their final technical review. The video had been edited to perfection. 4 minutes of clear, damning testimony that left no room for misinterpretation. I've confirmed the AV setup at the Fairfield County Club, Brennan said, pulling up the venue's technical specifications. The main screen is controlled from a booth near the kitchen. During dinner service, there's usually only one technician monitoring it, and he'll be focused on the auction presentation slides. How long will we have before someone can shut it down? If I time it right during the dinner portion, after the salad course but before the main presentation, we'll have at least 3 minutes before anyone in authority realizes what's happening. Maybe longer if people are too shocked to react quickly. Clarice nodded. 3 minutes was more than enough. The video was only 4 minutes long, and the most important revelations came in the first 2. Are you having any second thoughts? Brennan asked. None, are you? He considered the question. I keep thinking about all the events I've filmed in Greenwich over the years. All those couples who looked perfect on camera, who gave speeches about family values and community commitment. How many of them were lying? Probably more than we'd like to think. That's what bothers me most about David's situation. It's not just that he cheated, it's that he built his entire public image on being something he wasn't. He used his marriage to you as a credential, a prop to make himself look trustworthy and stable. And now he gets to use our son the same way if I let him. They spent another hour reviewing logistics and backup plans. Brennan had even arranged for a secondary way to interrupt the presentation if the primary method failed. As Clarice prepared to leave, her phone buzzed with yet another message from Ashley. David says you agreed to mediation. Maybe this means you're ready to be reasonable about everything. The audacity was breathtaking. Ashley genuinely seemed to believe that Clarice's willingness to negotiate custody arrangements meant she was being reasonable about the affair. Clarice typed back, Ashley, I'm curious about something. When you attend the charity gala with David in 2 weeks, how do you plan to introduce yourself to his colleagues and clients? What do you mean? I mean, what's your story? Are you his new girlfriend, his business partner? Or are you going to tell people you're the woman he left his pregnant wife for? You're being cruel. I'm being honest. David has spent months creating stories to make his choices seem reasonable. What story has he created for you? No response came, which told Clarice everything she needed to know. David hadn't prepared Ashley for the social reality of being his public mistress. He'd probably promised her that everyone would simply accept their relationship once his divorce was finalized. Another text arrived, this one from David himself. Clarice, I heard about the mediation. I'm glad you're being practical about our son's future. Maybe we can find a way to co-parent peacefully. She stared at the message, amazed by his continued self-deception. He genuinely believed that agreeing to mediation meant she was accepting his version of events, ready to quietly divorce and let him move on with Ashley while maintaining his reputation. I'm always practical, David. You should know that about me by now. I do know that. It's one of the things I've always admired about you. Really? Is that why you thought I'd quietly accept being replaced by your assistant? A long pause. Then, I never meant for things to happen this way. I was going to talk to you after the baby was born. Talk to me about what? About how you'd already been living with another woman for 4 months? About how you told her our marriage was over while I was carrying your child? How do you know about the apartment? About the lies you told Ashley? David, I know about everything. The question is what I'm going to do with that knowledge. No response came for over an hour. When it finally did, the tone had shifted. What do you want, Clarice? Money, the house, full custody? Just tell me what it will take to end this cleanly. There it was. David's true nature revealed. Not remorse, not genuine concern for their son's well-being, but a transactional approach to managing the consequences of his choices. I want you to face the truth about what you've done. That's all I've ever wanted. And then what? We move on? Clarice looked at her reflection in Jessica's darkened window, 8 months pregnant and stronger than she'd ever been in her marriage. Then we'll see what kind of man you really are, when you can't control the story anymore. She turned off her phone without waiting for his response. In 2 weeks at the Greenwich Charity Gala, David would discover exactly what she meant. And for the first time since finding him with Ashley, Clarice was genuinely excited about something. The truth had been patient long enough. The conference room at Catherine Hayes's law firm felt sterile and formal, all polished mahogany and leather chairs designed to intimidate rather than comfort. Clarice sat across from David for the first time since discovering him with Ashley, her 37-week belly a visible reminder of everything that had changed between them. David looked older than she remembered. Stress lines around his eyes, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. He wore his most expensive suit, the navy Tom Ford she'd helped him pick out for last year's dealer conference, as if expensive clothing could armor him against the consequences of his choices. "Thank you both for agreeing to mediation," said Dr. Helen Carmichael, the family counselor serving as their mediator. "My goal today is to help you reach agreements about custody and co-parenting that serve your child's best interests." Catherine sat beside Clarice, a stack of financial documents at her elbow. Across the table, David's attorney, Robert Sterling from Sterling & Associates, shuffled through his own papers with practiced efficiency. "Let's start with the basics," Dr. Carmichael continued. "David, you're requesting joint custody and shared parenting time. Can you tell me why you believe this arrangement would benefit your son?" David straightened in his chair, slipping into what Clarice recognized as his business presentation mode. "Dr. Carmichael, despite the personal issues between Clarice and myself, I've always been committed to being an involved father. I want my son to know he has a dad who loves him and wants to be part of his daily life." "And how do you envision that working practically?" Dr. Carmichael asked. "Shared weekends, some weeknight dinners, split holidays. I have a flexible schedule with my business, and I'm prepared to adjust my life to accommodate his needs." Clarice listened to David's performance with growing amazement. He spoke with such sincerity, such apparent conviction, that someone who didn't know the full story might actually believe him. "Clarice, what are your concerns about this proposal?" "My concern," Clarice said carefully, "is that David's definition of commitment has proven to be flexible. He was supposedly committed to our marriage when he was setting up apartments for other women. He was supposedly committed to our family when he was spending our joint finances on jewelry for his mistress. That's not relevant to my ability to be a good father," David interjected. "Isn't it?" Clarice turned to face him directly. "You've spent the last 6 months lying to everyone who matters to you. Me, your clients, our friends, our community. You created elaborate deceptions to hide your affair, including telling Ashley that our marriage was essentially over while I was carrying your child. Why should I believe your commitment to our son will be any more genuine than your commitment to me was?" David's lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, we're here to discuss custody arrangements, not to relitigate the marriage." "Actually," Catherine interjected, "character and reliability are absolutely relevant to custody decisions. Our position is that Mr. Mitchell has demonstrated a pattern of deception and prioritizing his own desires over family responsibilities." "That's completely unfair," David said, his careful composure beginning to crack. "I made mistakes in my marriage, but that doesn't make me a bad father." "You haven't been a father yet," Clarice pointed out. "Our son isn't even born. How can you claim to know what kind of father you'll be when you couldn't figure out how to be a faithful husband?" Dr. Carmichael raised a hand. "Let's take a step back. David, can you help me understand your living situation? Where would your son stay during your parenting time?" "I'm currently staying in a corporate apartment in Stamford while Clarice and I work out our housing arrangements," David said smoothly. Clarice almost laughed. Corporate apartment. As if the love nest he'd set up for Ashley was a business expense. "And will anyone else be present during your parenting time?" Dr. Carmichael asked. David hesitated for just a moment, long enough for everyone in the room to notice. "I'm not currently in a serious relationship, if that's what you're asking." "Really?" Clarice couldn't help herself. What would Ashley think about being described as not serious? "Clarice, I'm curious, David. When you introduce Ashley to your business associates at social events, how do you describe her? As your assistant? Your girlfriend? Or do you avoid labels altogether?" David's face flushed red. "My personal relationships don't affect my ability to parent." "Your personal relationships destroyed our family," Clarice shot back. "They absolutely affect your ability to parent, because they demonstrate that you can't be trusted to put anyone's needs above your own desires." Catherine placed a restraining hand on Clarice's arm, but Dr. Carmichael leaned forward with interest. "David, are you in a romantic relationship with someone who would be around your child?" That's complicated. It's not complicated at all, Clarice said. You've been living with Ashley Rodriguez for 4 months. You've taken her to public events in Greenwich. You've bought her expensive jewelry and told her your marriage was over. Either you're in a relationship with her or you're not. David's lawyer jumped in. My client's dating life is private, not when it involves custody of my son, Clarice interrupted. If David wants shared custody, I have the right to know who else will be caring for my child. Dr. Carmichael nodded. That's absolutely correct. David, I need you to be completely honest about your current relationship status. The silence stretched uncomfortably. David stared at his hands, probably calculating which version of the truth would damage him least. I am involved with someone, he finally admitted, but it's a new relationship, and we're taking things slowly. 6 months is new? Clarice asked. How did you? David stopped himself, realizing he'd just confirmed the timeline. Dr. Carmichael made a note. So this relationship began while you were still married, and your wife was pregnant? The situation is complicated. No, it's not, Clarice said firmly. You had an affair. You set up house with your mistress while I was preparing our nursery. You lied to everyone about it, including her. These aren't complications, David. These are choices you made. And they were wrong choices, David said, his voice rising. I know that. I'm not proud of how I handled things. But I can't change the past. And I won't let you use my mistakes to keep me away from my son. I'm not trying to keep you away from him, Clarice said. I'm trying to ensure that when you have custody of our child, you're focused on being his father, instead of managing your complicated love life. Dr. Carmichael consulted her notes. David, if you were granted overnight custody, would Ms. Rodriguez be present in the home? Another long pause. Possibly. We haven't made any definitive decisions about our living arrangements. So my newborn son would be in the care of his father and his father's mistress in the apartment where they conducted their affair while I was pregnant? You're being deliberately inflammatory. I'm being specific. Is that the environment you want our son exposed to? Catherine leaned forward. Dr. Carmichael, we'd like to propose a modified arrangement. Mr. Mitchell can have supervised visitation initially, with overnight stays only after he establishes a stable, appropriate living situation that doesn't involve his affair partner. That's completely unreasonable, David's lawyer protested. What's unreasonable, Clarice said, standing carefully, is asking me to trust our child's well-being to a man who destroyed his family for his own selfish desires. She looked directly at David, seeing not the successful businessman he projected to the world, but the weak, selfish man who'd prioritized his own pleasure over everything else. You want to be a father, David? Prove it. Choose your son over your mistress. Choose stability over whatever drama you've created with Ashley. Choose to be the man you should have been all along instead of the man you actually are. Clarice, I'm done listening to your excuses, she said, gathering her purse. When you're ready to be a real father instead of playing one for the mediator, Catherine will be in touch. As she walked toward the door, Dr. Carmichael called after her. Mrs. Mitchell, we haven't finished. Yes, we have, Clarice said without turning around. David will either choose to be our son's father or he won't, but he doesn't get to pretend he's a devoted dad while he's still playing house with the woman he cheated with. In the hallway, Catherine caught up with her. That was risky walking out like that. Was it? Because from where I'm standing, it looked like I just gave David exactly what he wants. Permission to prioritize Ashley over our son. Catherine's expression shifted as she understood. You think he'll choose her? I know he will. David always chooses the path that requires the least sacrifice from him. Fighting for meaningful custody means giving up Ashley, admitting he was wrong, rebuilding his life around his son's needs. That's hard work. And keeping Ashley is easy. Keeping Ashley is comfortable. It validates his choices, maintains his fantasy that he's the victim of circumstances rather than the author of them. As they waited for the elevator, Clarice's phone buzzed with a text from Brennan. Final equipment check complete. Ready for Saturday night. Saturday. The Greenwich Charity Gala was 3 days away. Catherine, what happens if David chooses not to pursue custody seriously? Then he essentially forfeits his parental rights for now. He could petition the court later, but it would be much harder to establish a relationship after abandoning his son initially. Clarice nodded, placing her hand on her belly where her son was moving restlessly, as if sensing the tension around him. Don't worry, little one, she whispered. Daddy's about to show us exactly who he really is, and then we'll know exactly what kind of future we're building without him. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for late November in Connecticut. From Jessica's apartment window, Clarice could see the lights of Manhattan twinkling across the East River as she prepared for what would either be her vindication or her social destruction. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a midnight blue maternity gown that accentuated her 38-week pregnancy rather than hiding it. Let everyone see exactly what David had abandoned for his 24-year-old mistress. "Are you sure about this?" Jessica asked for the third time, helping Clarice with her jewelry. "Once this happens, there's no going back." "There was no going back the moment David brought Ashley into our bedroom," Clarice replied, fastening the pearl earrings her grandmother had left her. "Tonight I'm just making sure everyone knows it." Her phone buzzed with a text from Brennan. "In position. Equipment tested and ready. Last chance to change your mind. No changes. See you there." Another message arrived, this one from David. "I know you'll be there tonight. I hope we can be civil for the sake of our community and our son." The audacity never ceased to amaze her. Even now, David was positioning himself as the reasonable party, the mature adult trying to keep things peaceful. "Of course we'll be civil, David. I'm always civil when I'm telling the truth." His response came quickly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I guess you'll find out." She turned off her phone and slipped it into her clutch. Tonight, David's attempts at control would end. The Fairfield County Club buzzed with Greenwich's elite as Clarice arrived fashionably late. The ballroom had been transformed into an autumn wonderland, with gold and burgundy decorations that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. She recognized faces from years of charity events, business leaders, politicians, socialites who'd smiled at her and David countless times. Tonight would be the last time many of them looked at her with anything resembling warmth. Margaret Chen spotted her immediately, rushing over with concern written across her face. "Clarice, you look radiant, but should you be out so late in your condition? When are you due?" "Any day now," Clarice replied with genuine warmth. Margaret had always been kind, one of the few people in Greenwich who seemed to value friendship over social positioning. "I wanted to say goodbye to everyone before the baby comes and my life changes completely." "Goodbye? Are you moving?" "In a way. A lot of things are changing for me." Margaret's expression grew more concerned. "I heard you and David are having some difficulties. I hope you're able to work things out. He seemed so happy at lunch last week." "Lunch?" "At the Brass Lantern, with that lovely Ashley from his office. They looked like they were celebrating something." Clarice managed a smile. "I'm sure they were." Across the ballroom, she spotted David near the bar, resplendent in his black tuxedo and commanding attention from a small group of business associates. Ashley stood beside him in a red dress that probably cost more than her monthly salary, wearing what looked like a new diamond necklace that caught the light every time she moved. They looked like a power couple. Young, successful, perfectly matched. If you didn't know the backstory, you might think they were made for each other. "Clarice." She turned to find Dr. William Hayes, Catherine's husband and one of Greenwich's most respected physicians. "Bill, lovely to see you. How's the family?" "Wonderful. Though I have to say I was surprised to hear about you and David. Catherine mentioned you're her client now. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes." "Indeed. I hope everything works out for the best. You're a remarkable woman, and that baby is lucky to have you as a mother." His kindness was genuine, and Clarice felt a pang of regret for what was about to happen. People like Bill and Margaret would be collateral damage in her war with David, their comfortable social world disrupted by truths they'd probably prefer not to know. But that was David's fault, not hers. He'd made these choices. She was simply ensuring everyone understood what those choices really meant. At 8:30, the dinner service began. Clarice had positioned herself at a table near the back with Jessica and a few other friends, where she could observe the room without being the center of attention. David and Ashley sat at a prominent table near the front, clearly chosen to signal their status as a couple. The salad course came and went. During the main course, Clarice watched Brennan move casually around the room with his camera equipment, documenting the evening like he had dozens of times before. No one paid him any special attention. He was part of the furniture at these events. At 9:15, as servers began clearing dinner plates and preparing for the evening's program, Clarice felt her son kick vigorously, as if sensing that something momentous was about to happen. "It's time," she whispered, placing her hand on her belly. The lights dimmed slightly as the evening's master of ceremonies, Judge William Hartley, a longtime pillar of Greenwich society and frequent gala host, took the stage. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our annual charity gala. Tonight we're raising funds for the Children's Hospital of Connecticut, a cause that's close to all our hearts." Clarice half listened to the familiar speech, Her attention focused on Brennan, who was now positioned near the AV control booth. She could see David at his table, relaxed and confident, probably congratulating himself on how well he'd managed the situation with his estranged wife. Ashley leaned close to whisper something in his ear, and he smiled, placing his hand over hers on the white tablecloth. The gesture was intimate, possessive, and completely public. He wasn't hiding their relationship anymore. He was celebrating it. And now, before we begin our auction, we have a special presentation. The main screen flickered to life, and for a moment, Clarice's heart stopped. This was it, the point of no return. Brennan's eyes found hers across the darkened ballroom, and she nodded once. The auction slides disappeared from the screen, replaced by Clarice's face. She looked composed, dignified, and completely credible as she began to speak. Good evening. My name is Clarice Mitchell. Many of you know me as David Mitchell's wife, but tonight I'm speaking for myself and for my unborn son. A confused murmur rippled through the ballroom. At his table, David's face went white as he recognized what was happening. Ashley looked confused, glancing between the screen and David as if waiting for an explanation. 6 weeks ago, I returned home early from a prenatal appointment, 8 months pregnant with our first child, and found my husband in our bedroom with his assistant, Ashley Rodriguez. The murmur became a gasp. Heads turned toward David's table as the pieces clicked into place. Ashley's face flushed crimson as she realized she was being identified by name to 400 of Greenwich's most influential people. They were in our bed wearing clothes I recognized, surrounded by jewelry I'd never seen before. David half rose from his chair, looking toward the AV booth, but the hotel staff there seemed as confused as everyone else. The video continued relentlessly. In the days that followed, I discovered this wasn't a moment of poor judgment. David and Ashley had been conducting an affair for at least 6 months. The ballroom had gone completely silent except for Clarice's clear, steady voice. Even the servers had stopped moving, transfixed by the unfolding revelation. At the front table, Ashley stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor in the silence. She looked around the room at hundreds of faces staring at her, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust to fascination. I can't, she whispered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. David, you said... But David wasn't listening. His attention was fixed on the screen, where his pregnant wife continued to methodically destroy his reputation with surgical precision, bought her expensive jewelry with our joint credit cards, and told her that our marriage was essentially over, that we were only staying together for the sake of the pregnancy. Ashley's face crumpled as she realized how many people now knew exactly what she was. Not David's girlfriend, not his new love, but the other woman who'd helped destroy a marriage. She grabbed her purse and ran toward the exit, her red dress a flash of color in the darkened ballroom. David started to follow, then stopped, caught between chasing after his mistress and trying to minimize the damage to his reputation. He chose his reputation. I share this not for sympathy but for truth. David has built his reputation in our community on being a family man, a devoted husband, someone you can trust with your business and your friendship. Clarice's voice continued from the screen, calm and devastating, as David stood frozen at his table, the focus of 400 pairs of eyes. I want you to know who he really is when those cameras aren't rolling and those handshakes aren't being counted. The video continued for another minute, but the damage was already complete. David's carefully constructed image lay in ruins, broadcasted to everyone who mattered in his professional and social world. When Clarice's final words, "Dignity isn't something other people can take from you, it's something you choose to keep," faded from the screen, the ballroom remained silent for a long moment. Then the whispers began. David looked around the room desperately, searching for allies, for friendly faces, for anyone who might offer support. Instead, he found averted gazes, uncomfortable expressions, and the kind of social isolation that money couldn't fix. Judge Hartley, still at the podium, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, that was, unexpected. Perhaps we should take a short break before continuing with our auction. As the lights came up, Clarice rose carefully from her chair. Her work here was done. How do you feel? Jessica whispered. Clarice looked across the ballroom at David, standing alone at his table as former friends and business associates found excuses to avoid him. Like I can finally breathe again, she said. The truth had set her free. Now it would have to set David free too, free from the comfortable lies he'd built his life around. Whether he could handle that freedom remained to be seen. 3 days after the charity gala, Clarice went into labor. The contractions started during breakfast at Jessica's apartment intense enough to make her drop her coffee mug. As they drove through Manhattan traffic toward Mount Sinai Hospital, Clarice couldn't help but think about the timing. Her son had waited until after she'd reclaimed her voice to make his entrance into the world. 12 hours later, Thomas William Mitchell entered the world weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces with his father's dark hair and what the nurses insisted were his mother's determined eyes. David hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't acknowledged in any way that his son had been born. "He's perfect," Jessica whispered, cradling Thomas while Clarice recovered. "Look at those little fingers." Clarice studied her son's face, searching for resemblances and finding only herself reflected back. This tiny person was hers completely, untouched by David's choices, innocent of the drama that had preceded his arrival. Catherine arrived that afternoon with flowers and legal documents. "Congratulations," she said, admiring Thomas before turning to business. "I hate to discuss this now, but David's response to the gala has been interesting." "What kind of response?" "Radio silence mostly. His lawyer hasn't returned my calls about finalizing custody arrangements, but there's been some interesting fallout in other areas." Catherine consulted her notes. "The BMW dealership where David worked has terminated his employment. Apparently several major clients saw the video and expressed concerns about doing business with him. His boss decided David had become too much of a liability." Clarice felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but it passed quickly. David had built his career on projecting trustworthiness and family values. If those projections were lies, the consequences were his to bear. "There's more," Catherine continued. "Ashley Rodriguez has apparently moved back to Miami. Her lease on the Stamford apartment was terminated early, and neighbors reported seeing moving trucks 3 days ago. She ran. Can you blame her? The video didn't just expose David, it identified her by name to Greenwich's elite. Her social media accounts have been flooded with comments, none of them positive. Clarice thought about the young woman who'd believed David's lies about their marriage being over. Part of her felt sorry for Ashley, but a larger part remembered the emerald robe, the laughter in her bedroom, the complete disregard for a pregnant woman's feelings. What about David? Where is he living now? Still in the Stamford apartment, as far as we know. Though without Ashley there and without his job, I imagine it feels quite different. A nurse entered to check on Thomas, cooing over his alert expression and healthy color. As she worked, Clarice's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Clarice, this is Margaret Chen. I wanted to congratulate you on your son's birth and to apologize. I had no idea what David was putting you through. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call." More messages followed throughout the day. Dr. Hayes sending his congratulations and offering his pediatric services. Several women from various charity committees expressing support and sharing their own stories of marital difficulties. Even Brennan sent a photo of Thomas that had somehow made it to the Greenwich social media pages, captioned simply, "New life begins." What surprised Clarice most was how many people seemed relieved to finally know the truth, as if David's perfect facade had made others feel inadequate, and its destruction had freed them to be more honest about their own struggles. Late that evening, as Jessica dozed in the visitor's chair and Thomas slept peacefully in his bassinet, Clarice finally heard from David. "I heard about the baby. Congratulations. Is he healthy?" She stared at the message for a long time before responding. "His name is Thomas. He's perfect." "Thomas, that's a good name. It was my grandfather's name." A long pause. Then, "Clarice, I know you're angry with me. You have every right to be. But he's my son too. I want to be part of his life. Then you should have thought about that before you chose Ashley over us." "I never chose her over you. It was complicated." "David, stop. Just stop with the explanations and the complications. You made choices. They had consequences. Thomas and I are living with those consequences, and so are you. What do you want me to do? I lost my job. Ashley left. I'm living alone in an apartment that feels like a prison. Haven't I been punished enough?" The self-pity in his message was staggering. Even now, facing the wreckage of his own choices, David saw himself as the victim. "You think this is about punishment? David, this is about truth. You spent months lying to everyone. Me, Ashley, our friends, your clients. The gala didn't punish you. It just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own actions. So what now? I can never see my son? You'll poison him against me forever? I'll never need to poison him against you, David. When Thomas is old enough to ask questions, I'll tell him the truth, that his father chose his own desires over his family's well-being. That when given the choice between being a husband and father or pursuing an affair, you chose the affair. That when given the choice between fighting for custody or maintaining your relationship with your mistress, you chose the mistress. That's not fair. It's accurate. And Thomas will decide for himself what kind of relationship he wants with the father who made those choices. Her phone went silent for over an hour. When David finally responded, his tone had changed. I want to see him. Then call Catherine and arrange supervised visitation. But understand this, if you want to be Thomas's father, you need to actually be his father, not the part-time version when it's convenient, not the weekend dad who shows up for the fun parts. His father. That means putting his needs first every time, even when it's difficult. I can do that. Can you? Because being Thomas's father means accepting that Ashley will never be part of his life. It means building a relationship with your son that isn't built on lies or convenience. It means being the man you should have been all along instead of the man you chose to be. Another long silence. Then, what if I can't be that man? For the first time since discovering the affair, Clarice felt genuinely sad for David. Not angry, not vindictive, just sad that he'd destroyed so much and seemed to understand so little. Then Thomas will grow up knowing he has a mother who loves him enough to tell him the truth, even when it's painful. And that will have to be enough. She turned off her phone and looked at her sleeping son. Thomas stirred slightly, his tiny hand curling around her finger with surprising strength. It's just us, little one, she whispered. But that's okay. We're going to be just fine. Outside the hospital window, Manhattan glittered in the December night. Somewhere out there, David was sitting alone in his empty apartment, finally facing the full weight of his choices. Ashley was probably unpacking boxes in Miami, trying to rebuild a life that hadn't been destroyed by bad decisions and public humiliation. And here in this quiet hospital room, Clarice held her son and felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. The truth had cost her a marriage, a social circle, and a life she'd thought she wanted. But it had given her something far more valuable: the knowledge that she could survive anything, that she could fight for what mattered, and that she could build a future based on honesty instead of comfortable lies. Thomas made a soft sound in his sleep, and Clarice smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: single motherhood, a custody battle, the practical realities of rebuilding her life. But tonight, holding her son, she felt invincible. The truth had set her free. Now it was time to see what kind of life she could build in that freedom. 6 months later, Clarice stood in the kitchen of her new home in Westport, watching Thomas practice his newly mastered skill of sitting up unassisted. The house was smaller than the Greenwich mansion, a modest colonial with 3 bedrooms and a yard that needed work, but it was entirely hers. "Look at you, big boy," she cooed, capturing Thomas's delighted laugh on her phone to send to Jessica. At 6 months old, he was a happy, healthy baby who seemed completely unbothered by the absence of his father. David had visited exactly 3 times since Thomas's birth. Each visit had been awkward, supervised, and brief. The last one, 2 months ago, had ended with David admitting he wasn't ready for the responsibility and asking for space to figure things out. Clarice had given him all the space he wanted. Her divorce had been finalized quietly, without drama or contested proceedings. David had signed whatever papers Catherine put in front of him, apparently eager to formalize the end of their marriage and move on with his diminished life. The house in Greenwich had sold quickly. The scandal had actually increased interest, with buyers curious about the Betrayal mansion that had become local legend. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the window, she could see Margaret Chen standing on the porch with a casserole dish and her familiar warm smile. "Margaret!" Clarice opened the door, genuinely pleased to see her. "Come in, please." "I brought dinner," Margaret said, handing over the dish. "My mother's lasagna recipe, perfect for a busy mom." They settled in the living room while Thomas played contentedly on his blanket, babbling to his toys with serious concentration. "He's gorgeous," Margaret said, watching him. "Those eyes are definitely yours." "Thank you." "How are things in Greenwich? I feel like I've been living in another world out here." Margaret's expression grew slightly uncomfortable. "Well, there's news. About David." Clarice set down her coffee cup. "Oh? He's dating someone new, a woman named Caroline who works at a law firm in Stamford. They've been seen together at a few restaurants." "How long?" "A few weeks, maybe a month. Well, people are talking." Clarice felt a flicker of something. Not jealousy exactly, but a kind of sad recognition. David's pattern was becoming clear. When faced with the hard work of self-reflection or genuine change, he simply found someone new to distract him. "I hope she's prepared for what she's getting into," Clarice said. "That's just it. Apparently she doesn't know about the affair or the video or any of it. David told her he's divorced because you grew apart during pregnancy, and that you're keeping his son from him out of spite." The lies continued. Even facing the wreckage of his previous deceptions, David couldn't help but construct new ones. "People are warning her, of course," Margaret continued, "but she seems quite taken with him. He's told her he's between jobs by choice, taking time to focus on personal growth." Clarice almost laughed. Personal growth. David's capacity for self-deception was truly remarkable. "Margaret, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course. Do you think less of me for what I did at the gala? For making everything so public?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "At first I was shocked. It seemed so unlike you, so dramatic. But then I thought about what you'd been going through. Pregnant, betrayed, lied to for months. And I realized you didn't have many choices." She paused, watching Thomas grab his feet and roll sideways. "If you'd stayed quiet, David would have controlled the story, made himself look like the victim of a marriage that just didn't work out. You would have been erased from your own narrative. So no, I don't think less of you. I think you did what you had to do to protect yourself and your son." The validation felt wonderful, even 6 months later. "Besides," Margaret added with a mischievous smile, "it was the most interesting charity gala Greenwich has ever had. People are still talking about it." They were interrupted by Clarice's phone buzzing with a video call from Jessica. She answered, turning the screen so Margaret could see. "Jess, say hello to Margaret." "Hi Margaret, how's our boy doing?" "Growing like a weed," Margaret replied as Thomas chose that moment to demonstrate his rolling skills, tumbling from sitting to lying down with a proud squeal. "Actually," Jessica said, "I'm calling with news. Remember Carrington and Associates, the consulting firm I mentioned? They want to meet with you next week about that senior analyst position." Clarice felt a flutter of excitement. She'd been working part-time from home, doing financial consulting for small businesses. But a position with Carrington would mean full-time work, health benefits, and the kind of professional challenge she'd missed. "It's in Manhattan," Jessica continued, "but they're flexible about remote work. You could keep living in Westport and commute a few days a week." "That sounds perfect. Email me the details." After Jessica hung up, Margaret studied Clarice thoughtfully. "You seem happy, really happy, not just putting on a brave face." "I am happy," Clarice realized with some surprise. "Not the life I planned, certainly not the life I expected 6 months ago, but it's mine. Every choice, every challenge, every success, it's all mine." Thomas had managed to scoot himself across the blanket toward his favorite toy, a feat that required serious celebration. As Clarice picked him up and spun him gently, he laughed with pure joy. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said to Margaret. "I thought losing David would destroy me. I'd built my entire adult identity around being his wife, being part of his world. When that ended, I was terrified I'd disappear. But you didn't. No, I discovered I was still here underneath all of that. Still Clarice, just freer, more honest, more myself than I'd been in years." Margaret smiled. "And what about Thomas? Does he ask about his father?" "He's 6 months old," Clarice laughed. "Right now his biggest concerns are whether his next meal is coming and whether he can successfully grab his own feet. But someday he will ask and I'll tell him the truth, age-appropriately but honestly." "What will you say?" Clarice looked at her son, this perfect little person who deserved better than comfortable lies. "I'll tell him that his father wasn't ready to be the man our family needed him to be, that sometimes people make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love most, and that when that happens, the people who are left behind get to choose whether they let those choices define them or whether they build something new." Thomas gurgled happily, completely absorbed in trying to fit his entire fist in his mouth. "I'll tell him that his mother chose to build something new." As Margaret prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Clarice, there's something else about Ashley." "What about her?" "She's back. In Connecticut, I mean. Someone saw her at the Stamford Town Center last week. She looked different, thinner, maybe a little lost." Clarice felt a complicated mix of emotions. She'd assumed Ashley had rebuilt her life in Miami, moved on from the disaster in Greenwich. "Do you know why she's back?" "Rumors say she couldn't find work down south. The video followed her. Someone always recognized her name or her face. She's apparently working at a small accounting firm in Bridgeport now, using her maiden name. The consequences had followed Ashley too, Clarice realized. The young woman who'd believed David's lies was still paying for choices she'd made at 24. I should feel vindicated, Clarice said. But mostly I just feel sad for her. You're a better person than I am. I still get angry when I think about what she did to you. She was young and stupid and believed a man who was very good at lying. The person I'm angry with is David, for using her naivety to get what he wanted. After Margaret left, Clarice gave Thomas his evening bottle and rocked him as the sun set over their new neighborhood. Through the window she could see other families in their daily routines, a father teaching his daughter to ride a bike, a mother gardening while her toddler played in a sandbox, an elderly couple walking hand in hand. Normal lives, honest lives, the kind of life she was building for herself and Thomas. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Clarice, this is Ashley. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to apologize. I know it's too late, but I'm sorry for what I did to your family. Clarice stared at the message for a long time. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to let Ashley live with her regret. But a larger part recognized something she'd learned over the past 6 months. Carrying anger was exhausting, and she had better ways to spend her energy. Ashley, I appreciate the apology. I hope you're able to build a good life for yourself going forward. She didn't add that she forgave Ashley, because forgiveness was more complicated than a text message. But she could acknowledge the apology and wish the young woman well without carrying resentment. As Thomas drifted off to sleep in her arms, Clarice thought about the job interview next week, about the new life she was building, about the future stretching ahead of them. 6 months ago, discovering David's betrayal had felt like the end of the world. Tonight it felt like it had been the beginning of something better, messier, more uncertain, but infinitely more honest. Thomas made a soft sound in his sleep, and Clarice kissed the top of his head. Sweet dreams, baby boy, she whispered. Tomorrow we keep building our new life, one truth at a time. 5 years later, the autumn sun streamed through the windows of Clarice's home office as she reviewed quarterly reports for Carrington and Associates. At 36, she'd been promoted to senior partner, leading a team of financial analysts and building a reputation for the kind of meticulous honesty that clients valued above everything else. Mommy, can you help me with my backpack? Thomas called from the kitchen, his 5-year-old voice carrying the slight urgency that came with school morning routines. Coming, sweetheart, she called back, saving her work and heading downstairs. Thomas stood by the kitchen island, struggling with the zipper on his Spider-Man backpack, his dark hair still bearing the rebellious cowlick that no amount of brushing could tame. He'd grown into a confident, curious child with an infectious laugh and an endless stream of questions about everything from dinosaurs to space travel. There you go, Clarice said, fixing the zipper and dropping a kiss on his head. Ready for kindergarten? Will you be there for the parent conference this afternoon? Wouldn't miss it. Mrs. Patterson says you're doing excellent work with your reading. Thomas beamed with pride. At 5, he was already reading at a 2nd grade level, devouring picture books with the same intensity Clarice brought to financial reports. The doorbell rang, and Thomas raced to answer it. Through the window, Clarice could see Jessica's familiar figure on the porch. Aunt Jess! Thomas launched himself into Jessica's arms for their daily goodbye hug before school. Hey there, buddy. Ready to learn something amazing today? Jessica had never married, claiming that watching Clarice's journey through motherhood had convinced her she preferred being the fun aunt to being a full-time parent. She visited every few weeks, spoiling Thomas with books and building blocks and serving as Clarice's closest confidant. Did you see the news? Jessica asked as Thomas gathered his things for school. What news? David's getting married again. It was in the Greenwich social pages. Clarice felt a flicker of something. Not jealousy, but perhaps curiosity about the woman brave enough to take on David's history. Is it Caroline? The lawyer from Stamford? No, that ended about 2 years ago when she figured out who he really was. This is someone new, a woman named Helena who moved to Connecticut from California. The announcement says they met at a personal growth retreat in Arizona. Clarice almost smiled. A personal growth retreat. David's capacity for reinventing himself remained impressive. Does she know about Thomas? The announcement mentions David's previous marriage, but describes him as having no children. I guess in David's version of the story, his son doesn't exist. Clarice felt a familiar surge of protectiveness toward Thomas, who was currently sorting through his homework folder with the serious concentration of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. His loss, she said simply. Will you tell Thomas? Someday when he's old enough to understand. For now he has everything he needs. And it was true. Thomas had never asked about his father's absence, not in any serious way. To him, their family consisted of Mommy, Aunt Jess, Margaret Chen, who'd become an honorary grandmother, and the various friends and teachers who filled their daily lives. Speaking of everything he needs, Jessica said, lowering her voice, how are things with Connor? Connor Walsh was a pediatrician Clarice had met at one of Thomas's checkups 6 months ago. He was kind, patient with children, and refreshingly honest about his own divorce from a marriage that had ended when his ex-wife decided she preferred her personal trainer to her husband. Good, Clarice said, and meant it. Different from what I had with David, but that's probably for the better. Different how? Connor doesn't try to manage my image or control my narrative. He likes that I'm successful, that I have opinions, that Thomas is a priority in my life. He's not threatened by my independence, he's attracted to it. It had taken Clarice years to understand the difference between love that sought to diminish and love that sought to celebrate. Connor belonged firmly in the latter category. Are you thinking about marriage? Maybe eventually, but not because I need someone to complete me, or because Thomas needs a father figure. If it happens, it'll be because Connor adds something wonderful to our already complete life. The school bus honked outside and Thomas grabbed his backpack with practiced efficiency. Bye, Mommy. Bye, Aunt Jess. See you at the conference. He bounded out the door, his energy and enthusiasm making both women smile. He's remarkable, Jessica said, watching through the window as Thomas climbed onto the bus and immediately started talking to his best friend Oliver. He is. And you know what the amazing thing is? He's growing up thinking this is normal, that mothers are strong, that women have careers they love, that families come in all different shapes. David's absence hasn't damaged him. If anything, it's freed him to become exactly who he's supposed to be. Later that afternoon at Thomas's parent conference, his kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Patterson, pulled out a folder of his work. Thomas is exceptional, she said, spreading out drawings and writing samples. Academically gifted, certainly, but more than that. He's empathetic, confident, and has this wonderful sense of justice. When other children are upset, he's always the first to offer comfort. She pointed to a drawing Thomas had made the previous week, a picture of himself and Clarice in front of their house with the words, "My family," written in careful kindergarten letters. I asked the children to draw their families, Mrs. Patterson explained. Some children seemed confused about how to include divorced parents or complicated custody arrangements. Thomas just drew you two and said, "This is my family. We take care of each other." Clarice felt tears prick her eyes. He's never known anything different. And that's shown him that love isn't about having all the traditional pieces. It's about having the right pieces. As they drove home, Thomas chattered about his day, the book he'd read, the friend he'd helped with math, the butterfly they'd seen during recess. "Mommy," he said suddenly, "Oliver asked me if I miss having a dad." Clarice's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I can't miss something I never really had. And I told him you're the best mom in the whole world. So our family is perfect the way it is." Out of the mouths of babes. That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Clarice sat in her living room with a cup of tea, thinking about the paths that had led her here. 5 years ago, discovering David's betrayal had felt like the end of everything. Tonight, it felt like it had been the beginning of something infinitely better. Her phone buzzed with a text from Connor. "Hope the conference went well. Thomas is lucky to have you as his mom. He told his teacher our family is perfect the way it is." Hard to argue with that logic. Smart kid. Takes after his mother. Clarice smiled, setting her phone aside. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its evening quiet. Porch lights coming on, families finishing dinner, children being tucked into bed. 5 years ago, she'd thought happiness meant having everything look perfect from the outside. Now she understood that real happiness came from building something genuine, something honest, something that could withstand the truth. David was getting remarried, probably telling his new fiancée the same lies he'd told Ashley, the same stories he'd told himself. Ashley was somewhere in Connecticut, hopefully building a life based on better choices than the ones she'd made at 24. And Clarice was here, in a house she owned, raising a son who thought their life was perfect, building a career she loved, and considering a future with a man who celebrated her strength instead of fearing it. The truth had cost her a marriage, a social circle, and a life she'd thought she wanted. It had given her everything she actually needed. As she turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Clarice paused at Thomas's doorway. Her son slept peacefully, surrounded by books and toys and drawings. Evidence of a childhood filled with love, honesty, and security. "Sweet dreams, my brave boy," she whispered. "Tomorrow, we keep building our beautiful, honest life." And somewhere in Greenwich, David was probably spinning new stories for his new fiancée, never understanding that the truth he'd tried so hard to avoid had given his ex-wife the exact freedom she needed to become the woman she was always meant to be. The truth had set them all free. Some of them just knew what to do with that freedom. Final message: the truth that sets you free. This screenplay reminds us that the most powerful revenge isn't destroying those who hurt us, but refusing to be destroyed by their actions. Clarice didn't need to become cruel or vindictive to win. She simply chose truth over silence, dignity over convenience, and authenticity over social performance. The story shows that when someone tries to erase us from our own narrative, we have the right, and perhaps the duty, to pick up the pen and keep writing. David thought he could control how his betrayal would be perceived, but discovered that truth has its own gravitational force. Thomas grew up never knowing his father, but never felt that absence as a loss, because he was raised by a mother who taught him that true love is consistent presence, courageous honesty, and unconditional protection. The most beautiful part of Clarice's journey wasn't her public revenge, but her quiet transformation, from dependent wife to warrior mother, from woman who hid problems to woman who faces truths, from person who measured worth through others' eyes to someone who builds value through authentic choices. Final reflection: when we discover that someone we love has betrayed us deeply, what defines us more? How we choose to respond to the betrayal, or how we choose to rebuild our life after it? End of story. Truth won. Dignity prevailed. A new life began. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.